Simpsons arcade game, a superb beat-em-up that many kids would play in their local arcades when Konami released it back in 1991. If you stopped watching The Simpsons years back, I can confirm that it's still a thing here in 2025, and we're currently on season 37. So to actually release an arcade game in 1991 whilst The Simpsons was a relatively new but massively popular cartoon was a very brave move to make. What I mean to say is that many iconic characters have come and gone since 1991, so to have a full game whilst the Simpsons universe had yet to truly evolve was very impressive. This is one of the arcade games I personally played a lot of as a kid and rediscovered it many years back with Maine, and to date this game never disappoints whenever I play it. It captures the true Springfield vibe perfectly with graphics that look much like you were watching an early 90s episode of The Simpsons. From its cutscenes and voice samples, this game was every Simpsons fan dream come true. And since the beat-em-up genre was still massively popular in 1991, with other games such as Streets of Rage for the Mega Drive, and other arcade big hitters like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, also by Konami, then why not base The Simpsons around this style too? And that's exactly what Konami did. But of course, we aren't talking nitty-gritty knife throwing and Molotov cocktail beat-em-up style. We're more or less talking whacking Mr. Burns' crew with skateboards, vacuum cleaners and skipping ropes. I am pretty sure that the most fierce character out of all the 4 Simpsons family members that we can play as here is actually Homer, who will punch. Konami had to get this game right, and making this a Streets of Rage affair would have likely have caused backlash with angry parents, which was very common back in those days. The game is based around rescuing Maggie from Mr. Burns and Smithers. We travel through most of the iconic landmarks of Springfield, fighting through various henchmen that Mr. Burns and Smithers have placed in the way. And we fight wildlife animals too. Pretty much everybody in Springfield is against you. We can play up to 4 players originally and play as Bart, Lisa, Homer and Marge. Each one of the characters comes with their own unique style of attacking, plus special attacks. There's a total of 8 stages in the arcade game, and each ends with the typical boss fight, plus we get bonus stages thrown in too. Now this game only received a few home conversions, but nevertheless today we're going to be ranking from worst to best the very best home conversion of Konami's 1991 smash hit beat 'em up game, which is The Simpsons. Now, it's really unfortunate that us PAL region Commodore 64 users didn't get this when Konami released it for this system back in 1991. We did get a fairly popular Simpsons game though, which was Ocean's Bart vs the Space Mutants. But of course, this game came with a lot of criticism like it still does today. Although I did have this game as a kid and thought it was okay. But what kids would have liked so much more would have been a port of this. This likely would have sold in its many at the time. But if you happen to be in the NTSC regions, i.e. North America, then you would have been fairly happy with this 8-bit Commodore 64 conversion. Firstly, unlike the arcade game, this version only supported 2 players, which is acceptable really. I mean, this is a Commodore 64 game after all, and even by 1991, it's impressive how massive arcade games were still getting ports to this system. I think it's fair to say here that Konami did this port a fair bit of justice of replicating their arcade masterpiece for a much inferior system. Let's take a look at the opening animation scenes for example. This looks extremely highly polished and very premium too. The game even comes with opening animations where the diamond flies into the air just before the first stage begins. The gameplay isn't too bad. I will say this though, this is a fairly tough game to play. I don't think the hit collision detection is entirely fair at times, but I did learn that by jumping attacks you are less likely to come by much harm compared with just hitting out at enemies. Now, I played the game as Bart. Although Homer is actually my favourite Simpsons character, Bart has much more going on with the arcade game and wanted to test it out here. Bart uses his skateboard to travel around and hit out with it, and it all looks really good. Even controls are fairly tight here, although admittedly it's a slight bit slow when moving around. Talking about moving, this faithful port even features scrolling screens, and it scrolls really nicely and fluid too. There are bits and pieces missing from the first stage, but any 8-bit fan will know about arcade home conversions being no stranger for missing parts of the arcade games. For example, the fireman which comes out isn't just a fireman, but there's actually 2 here. We only get roughly around 2 enemy sprites at any time too. Something else which stage 1 is missing is the little girl who offers us some health just before the first boss. Talking about bosses, the bosses in this game are fairly impressive, and come stage 2 I wasn't expecting to see a crusty balloon as a boss, and at the size of this too, but here it is and it looks fairly good and even bounces around on screen when hit at times. We also get the bonus levels with this version too. Admittedly though, these are joystick breakers, so play these bonus stages very wisely with your joystick. I mean, this is a solid conversion and my only real issue with it is the sprites. The backgrounds and even music and sound effects are really nicely done here, but the sprites kind of ruin it. If Konami somehow could have pulled off high-res sprites, then this game could have been one of Commodore 64's best arcade ports around. This is the second and last computer version of the game for MS-DOS. Again, I am fairly sure that this would have been more of an American release, as I personally don't ever recall seeing a single copy of this here in England throughout my years of going to game shops. It kind of feels like Europe was really screwed over in the early 90s with playing this game at home. And yes, I said Europe as we were technically a part of it once. But anyways, I do digress. This 1991 release then was also published by Konami, and in some ways it was very much like the Commodore 64 version, only obviously this looks much more the part in terms of its graphics and most certainly with its vibrant colours used. But we won't bash the Commodore 64 as it did have a limited colour palette, and let's just remember that hardware was actually 9 years old at this point. The MS-DOS game is another case of jumping to attack, as again smacking enemies on the ground seems to do more harm than good. This version though actually comes with most, if not everything that the arcade game had. We get the offering of a burger just before the first boss fight, as well as the bowling ball which the Commodore 64 version was missing. But we also have here the strange case of the 2 firemen, which makes me wonder if certain parts of the world actually had 2 firemen for its specific country's arcade release. The scrolling screens are much more smoother here and the sprites move around much speedier too, making this much more enjoyable to play, and it controls and feels that much more like the real deal. This is a DOS game and obviously we could use different sound cards for this game, and so I choose the Sound Blaster option to output the sound. It doesn't actually sound that great to be honest, and I'd probably even say that the C64 version sounded a little better, but considering how much nicer this game plays, then I was happy to rank this version here. We get a fairly nice looking character selection screen as well as the opening animations, which again, these are a massive upgrade from the 8-bit counterpart version. Much more colour and definition around objects. These are an upgrade from the 8-bit version with much more colour and definition around objects. And talking about definition, the sprites in this game look highly polished. As great as this version was at the time and clearly superior to its counterpart game, it could have done with the flashing colours when hitting bosses around. But these of course were times where not everything was possible to cram onto a small little floppy disk. All in all, this was probably the best version of the game outside of the arcade, well up until 2012 that is. idea of emulating games from yesteryear on your modern day computer or portable device. Maybe you hate the thought of loading times of your favourite games and prefer to watch commentary videos or anything else retro related. Just Jamie Retro Realm is the ultimate channel for anybody who loves games from the golden age of arcade to home microcomputers as well as the console generations. From the 1970s to the 2000s, then this channel will have something that you'll love, including themed video series as well as beginner's guides from standalone emulators to more complex front-end emulation system guides. This channel even supports and showcases modern day games for retro platforms, or more commonly known as homebrew games, as well as offering reviews for physical hardware. Just Jamie will absolutely have something for any preference, and the video uploads are also very frequent too. So if you want a retro gaming channel which appreciates everything from the Sinclair ZX80 to the modern day era arcade games and love the idea of discovering new games from yesteryear, hit subscribe and set notifications so you don't miss out on almost daily content. As I concluded with the MS-DOS version, this was the best up until 2012. Sadly though, this digital port for both PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade was pulled from both around a year and a half later at the end of 2013. There doesn't seem to be a known reason for this, or not that I've come across, so I'm guessing that this was some type of licensing problem, but like I say, that's just a wild guess. Now, you might think that this was just an emulated version of the arcade game, but no, this is actually a port which Konami enhanced for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Rather than doing something similar to what Ubisoft did with the Turtles in Time Reshelled remake, Konami stuck with the original look. At this point in history, most TVs were 16:9, and gone were the early 90s of 4:3 aspect ratios. We can increase or decrease the size of the screen, but we cannot stretch it to a widescreen format, which is great as doing this would distort the image and the quality anyways. We have a decent array of options here which we can also access whilst playing the game too. We have difficulty settings, and we can also play this offline and play with up to 4 players locally, or we could play online and play multiplayer with others around the world. But like I said, this game was sadly pulled back in 2013. A really nice touch with this port is that as we play the game, our progress saves, so we can actually then start the game at a later level whenever we choose to power it off. Other options include basic pixel smoothing rather than having those very harsh looking pixels. It was lovely to play a port of this game too, where we can actually die and have the option to continue there and then. The C64 version and MS-DOS versions had none of this at all. Once dead, that was game over. And that's pretty much it for ranking the few ports this classic got. Would you agree with putting a more modern version in first place due to its options? Did you actually live in Europe at the time and manage to bag a copy of this game on the C64 or the MS-DOS version? As always, drop a comment below, and if you are new to this video, then I'll drop a link in the comment section so you can watch the rest of this arcade port series. Anyways, again, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay retro.